This is the Hollywood version of the story, the famous Lawrence of Arabia film, and if you haven't seen it or have not seen it recently, it's worth a second go. In actual fact, this is a real picture of what it looked like. They had camel corps and horse corps. Camels are very important in this part of Arabia because it's mainly desert. They can go 12 days without water because they store water in their humps. So they were a very critical element to the battle. The Arab revolt would start in Yambo on the Red Sea Gulf, on the Red Sea coast. As you can see, it's just Mecca is here, Yambo is here. And the Arab revolt would work its way all the way up through Syria. Notice here there is a very important railway that connected Damascus with Mecca. That was the railway used by the Ottoman Empire to ferry troops and supplies and keep control. So the focus of the revolt was to blow up the bridges on the railway and disrupt this railway. Then the Ottomans had no way of coming down to protect their assets. In effect, they lost pretty badly. By the time they got to Aqaba, General Allenby was mounting a British Commonwealth force that came across Sinai and liberated. Every time something happens, it's liberation, of course. And if you're on the opposite side, it's occupation. Okay. So they would have a British army that would join the Arab revolt forces, and the Turks would be expelled all the way back into Asia Minor. While this is happening and all these promises are made and commitments made, two very debonair gentlemen, Monsieur François Picot and Sir Mark Sykes, meet on behalf of their respective governments and over some very purely distilled whiskey and champagne, discuss how they're going to divide the spoils of war. Well, they sit down, they have a ruler and a pencil, and they decide to draw, okay, this is the area the French are particularly interested in, so we'll rule this area. We will have quasi-control of this area, but we don't need to put too many assets there. The British, of course, the Gulf of Aqaba, Baghdad, Basra is very important to them, so they will occupy this directly, and all this rest of the area would be also under their influence. So we have occupation and zones of influence. And at this time, Jerusalem and Palestine was considered a little delicate point. So they decided they would internationalize it. The Russians, the British, and the French would be in charge of an international rule in Palestine, and it would be open to all religions. Oops, I'm pushing the wrong button here. It's very interesting to see how the borders were later developed after World War I. Remember this? Remember the colored areas that we talked about? Somehow the borders happened to coincide with these areas, except for a few changes. So northern part of Iraq was supposed to go to the French, so they have an equal share in the oil. But then, through some other compromises in Africa and everywhere else, they decided to give up on this Mosul area, or the northern part of what is today Iraq. The borders that were established are a result of colonial powers sitting with a map, a ruler, and a pencil, and drawing lines. Now, it's interesting that the borders of Jordan, which is here, are kind of odd. This line is understandable, this line is understandable. It was supposed to go this way, and this is all totally useless desert. But somehow the border of Jordan was a little crooked. Apparently, when discussing the matter with Churchill, he decided that he wanted to draw where Jordan would be, and he had had a few drinks too many, so his pen was not very straight, so he kind of went a little bit like that, so we had borders of Jordan developed that way. This is how Sykes-Picot, the French and the British, drew the borders. If we look at this area, the same area, if we look at it ethnically, northern Syria and northeastern Iraq are basically Kurdish tribes who don't even speak Arabic. They may be Muslim, but they don't speak Arabic. The area in the west of Syria here is basically has a predominance of a sect of Shiism or Shiite Muslims who are called Alawites. They controlled pretty much the rural area in this part, notwithstanding the main cities of Damascus and Aleppo. And this whole area here, mainly desert, was occupied by Sunni Muslims. The area near Basra, the southern part of Iraq, is all Shiites, the same as Iran all the way up here. Not only did the Shiites extend into Iran, but the Sunnis did not extend very far beyond this, but the Kurds also are in this whole region all around where we see it now. A lot of Anatolia has a majority Kurdish population. Parts of Iran have a Kurdish population, and parts of Turkey and Iran have significant Kurdish populations. This map actually I took from an article that appeared a year ago in the New York Times, when somebody was suggesting that perhaps the borders will end up being redrawn. And it's not, it gives you pause, and it may well happen. If the Berlin Wall came down, then surely the borders of some of the Arab states can change. Sykes-Picot was like the first betrayal of the Arab cause, behind the scenes. The Arabs only learned about it, the Arabs did not know about it. They were leading the army and liberating from the Ottoman Empire. That was all behind closed doors. At the same time, there was a second major betrayal as seen by the Arabs. In November of 1917, Britain's Foreign Secretary, Sir Arthur James Balfour, signs a letter to Baron Walter Rothschild, then the richest man in the world, for transmission to Chaim Weizmann, promising the creation of a Jewish national, quote-unquote, national home in Palestine. Now, Chaim Weizmann was a German-born Jewish scientist who studied in Switzerland, went to England, very quickly became in charge of the Royal Military Research Laboratories, and made some major discoveries, including one where he developed, I believe it was acetone, basically that you can use it as a fuel to fire bombs and missiles, but it won't show where they're coming from because there won't be a puff of smoke. So it burns without leaving smoke behind, so the enemy cannot see where you're shooting at them from. Well, this was a huge advantage in the war. And through his connections with Lord Balfour and Rothschild, they managed to get this promise. This is the actual letter of the promise. The key elements in it are very important. His Majesty's government view with favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So Jews in any other country cannot be persecuted now because they have their own country, and Arabs living in Palestine, who at that point in time constituted by far the vast majority, as we will see, nobody asked them what they thought of this. It was just, hey, we're the colonial powers, we do what we like. The Bolshevik Revolution took place 3 months after the Balfour Declaration was signed, and the agreement became public because Russia had been consulted on it, being one of the countries that was supposed to be ruling the Holy Land. So it became public, and while the Arab armies were forging forward, this was developing in Palestine, and Chaim Weizmann was actually coming to the region, getting his own camel, and joining Faisal, who was the son of the Sharif of Mecca, who was leading the battle, and Lawrence of Arabia, and saying, look, this is a minor part of the Middle East. We are very good neighbors. We love you. You've never persecuted us. We just want a little corner of Palestine so that we can establish a little homeland. Now, if you support us, we will support you in many ways. We have scientists, we have very intelligent people. We can help you develop your whole of Arabian Peninsula into a paradise. And we will help you. You will be very happy, we will be happy neighbors. Well, Faisal was all of 33 years old. He was raised in Mecca. He had never been to Europe or even to beyond Syria in his life. So he didn't know what to do with this. Well, let's focus on what we're doing now. Well, the Arab revolt is over, the First World War is over, 1919, you have the Paris Peace Conference. Faisal goes to represent the Arab cause, still pleading for an Arab kingdom from Turkey all the way to the Indian Ocean. He has to make a statement, and the statement he makes is very interesting. I bring it in full here because a lot of its elements still stand today as the aspiration of the Arab people. The purpose is to unite the Arabs eventually. Now that's giving a little bit leeway for negotiations. To unite the Arabs eventually into one nation. The Arabs expect the powers to think of them as one potential people, jealous of their language, liberty, and ask that no steps be taken inconsistent with the prospect of an eventual union of these areas under one sovereign government, being that of Faisal, the leader of the revolt. In a word, we ask you not to force your whole civilization upon us, but to help us to pick up what serves us from our experience. I think it's quite a powerful statement for a 33-year-old, someone coming out of the desert, and it has a lot of relevance today, if we think about it. Meanwhile, at the Paris conference, peace conference, the Zionist movement, which was pushing for the creation of a national home in Palestine, presented its own map, and they said, we see the Jewish national home as south of Lebanon, all of the Golan Heights. We have to be sure that we control the east bank of the Jordan as well, because it's fertile land. So this fertile land is very critical for us, and we really would like your help, our colonial friends, to establish a country encompassing this area. Now, there are other proposals made that were even more wild, talking of thy country from the Euphrates to the Nile, and drawing a map, a line around that area. But I think this was what was taken more seriously at the time. The Paris Conference outcome was moving from occupation to mandate, making colonialism legal. They considered, remember we're talking now the early 1900s, colonial powers were considered educated, forward people. The rest of the world were backward people, ignorant people that needed somebody to help them, to educate them, to help guide them. They have no way of governing themselves. They need help. So that at the Paris Conference, the demand for Arab self-determination was ignored. Who is Faisal? They sent him on a tour of France for 18 days to see the sights while they were discussing. France was to govern Syria and Lebanon, and Great Britain have the mandate for Palestine. Now, it's no longer international, but British controlled. Arabs are disillusioned. Faisal is accused of selling to the Zionists, that you even talk with them, you know, this is our land, they don't exist here. What is this story? How can you even talk to them? By siding with now here's the critical point. By siding with the British, the Arabs were robbed of the inheritance they had expected to receive after siding with them. Thusly, the Arabs instead helped bring the last Muslim empire to an end, the Ottoman Empire, and ended up under occupation. I'm bringing these points so that you have to try to connect the dots between ethnicity, religion, and statehood. Now that the French had the mandate for Syria, a General Gouraud amasses his troops in Lebanon, marches into Syria. After a 6-hour battle in the hills somewhere outside Damascus, he enters victorious into Damascus. And what's the first thing he does? He goes to visit the tomb of Saladin in Damascus. First thing ever that he does once he enters Damascus, straight to the tomb of Saladin and says, "Awake, Saladin, we have returned. My presence here consecrates the victory of the cross over the crescent. Do you get it?"
Yeah.
Okay. Now, just a wonderful way to be welcomed into the country. But, you know, these are colonial powers. They can do anything they like. Who are these peasants to tell them anything? Now, meanwhile, the League of Nations gets into the act and legitimizes the Balfour Declaration. Of course, who's the League of Nations in those days? The countries victorious in World War I, the French, the British, the Americans, and so on. And they pass a resolution saying, whereas the principal allied powers have also agreed that the mandatory should be responsible for putting into effect the Balfour Declaration, an appropriate Jewish agency shall be recognized by the British occupiers as a public body for the purpose of advising and cooperating with the British administration in Palestine in matters that may affect establishment of a Jewish national home and the interests of the Jewish population of Palestine. Now, no such thing was considered necessary with the Arabs. The Zionist organization shall be recognized as such an agency. So not only do they legitimize the presence of the Jews in Palestine, but also legitimize the Zionists who are a political entity rather than a religious group. If we look at the numbers a little bit through history, it might be useful. If we look at Palestine from 1851 to 1948, in 1850,